If you're a CEO or senior leader allocating resources today, what's the more urgent priority? Mitigating AI's impact on entry-level workers, using AI to reduce reliance on them, rebuilding the talent pipeline altogether? Well, what about job stability in the current climate if you are a job seeker right now? Where do you think early career workers are least at risk for layoff these days? Welcome to Macro Talk, where we examine business news through a big picture lens to help you stay ahead of change. I'm your host, Hope King. With me and with these insights is Christine Cruzvergara, the Chief Education Strategy Officer at Handshake, the platform dedicated to helping college students find jobs. Christine, welcome to Macro Talk.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So I really want to start with these questions. The more urgent priority for business leaders. If you're looking at the choices ahead of you, in front of you, you have AI, which is an effective tool to create more productivity, but there's a lot of consequences. We've seen a lot of estimates around how detrimental this could be on early career workers. So if you are a senior leader, a CEO watching this, and you're looking at those resources, what do you think is that more urgent priority of the three? Mitigating AI's impact on entry-level workers, using it to actually rely less on them, or rebuilding the early career talent pipeline?
I would say it's probably rebuilding, and it's redefining what the early talent pipeline looks like. I don't think you can ever get rid of all of your early talent. You need to be building your pipeline of talent so that you have middle managers, so that you have senior leaders one day, and you have to develop that talent. AI, of course, is going to be part of that equation. So right now, the most urgent thing for senior leaders is to figure out, how does AI supplement or augment the early talent roles? How are you going to redefine that? What skill sets do you really need from early talent? And how will you train them to use it effectively to be more productive and to be more efficient?
Now, of course, you are a platform that helps connect college students with jobs. So this is part of your book, and I totally get that. And I bring it up also because you know this tension exists, and that's why I started with this question. You have senior leaders who are telling the New York Times, for example, that nobody has patience for hand-holding in this environment, right? This is a direct quote from the head of people and talent at the venture capital firm Signal Fire. And then you have other companies who are saying that they are actually allocating their resources to the most senior data scientists on their team so that they can build systems to replace 75 workers. The question again to you is, I understand, of course, that is we do need it, but why aren't a lot of these leaders thinking about building that pipeline right now?
Well, I think AI is new, it's sexy, it's the topic that everyone is talking about. And whenever that's the case, it's going to be the buzz and the focus for a while. I also think the reality is customers don't want to only interact with machines. They don't. In any industry, whether you're looking at retail, you're looking at finance, you're looking at tech, you're looking at healthcare, it doesn't matter. As human beings, we also want to interact with people. And so as much as AI can do, it will never completely replace all of the people in your workforce. And if you continue to only focus on AI, you will end up with a missing gap. And at some point, some of your competitors and some of the other companies in your industry will surpass you because they would have actually invested in early talent when you weren't.
So one of the things I like to do here on the show and the platform is to really have these reality checks on the actual decisions that executives are making, and to talk very plainly about what it means when you're in one of these roles. And let's be very honest, a lot of these executives are managing their careers in the short term, and if they're being measured against efficiency, what is their incentive for the longer term? I mean, they may be out of the workforce by the time some of these issues of a huge talent gap in the early pipeline stage may already be done with their careers by that time.
That's a fair point. And I think ideally in most companies, most industries, you at least have a board or you have investors or you have stakeholders who do actually care about the long term. And hopefully those folks are part of the decision making and part of the influence in making sure that this isn't just a short-term win, but a much bigger long-term loss down the road. Don't get me wrong, AI is here to stay. And it is important that we have an AI-enabled workforce. I think that is critical. I think all early talent, middle talent, senior talent, everybody needs to be learning AI right now. But it is a matter of figuring out what that balance is and how it's used. And I think that's the big question that everyone is grappling with. How should it be used? How should it be used effectively and productively? And what does that end up looking like for our specific industries or roles?
Well, there's been an avalanche of signals that actually are suggesting that these entry-level jobs, especially white-collar jobs, are under threat. And I'll just go through a couple of the headlines I know that you know. Anthropic's CEO warning AI could drive unemployment to upwards of 20%. A World Economic Forum survey finding that 41% of employers are expected to downsize because of automation. Google just this week offering buyouts to reduce staff. Are we looking at the quiet collapse of the entry-level economy?
I don't think completely. I do think it's a tough time right now. Certainly, even our job postings on Handshake are down 15% over the past year. Applications are up 30% over the last year. It is a more competitive job market at the moment. Now, all of our numbers reflect what we're seeing in the broader economy as well. And so I do think that angst, that anxiety, that concern is very real and very palpable. Do I think all entry-level jobs, as those headlines you've read have sort of suggested, will completely go away? No, I don't. Because the reality is people have to enter the workforce one way or another. They're not going to enter at a mid-level position. So really the redefinition of that entry level is what you're going to see happen. So an entry-level role might not mean purely editing and doing a whole bunch of paper review if you're in law. It might not mean just writing a lot of code anymore. It might look very different. And I think that is a big question, and it causes a lot of consternation, both for job seekers and quite frankly, even for employers while they're trying to figure that out. But do I think there will be full elimination? No.
Where are the biggest declines in both job listings and job applications?
Yeah, the biggest declines in both job listing and job applications, federal government would certainly be one of them. And I point that out because in the past 18 months, that was actually the fastest growing industry. And we were actually seeing a very steep upward trend of interest from students and from the federal government in posting opportunities. That was on track. So class of 2025 was on track to exceed even the application rates of the class of 2024 for federal government until mid-January. As soon as the executive orders hit, that immediately went down. In federal government, but we saw an increase in state and local government. So that was an interesting flip between those two different entities. Things are still a little bit lower in tech as well. Obviously, after the big layoffs that we saw the past couple of years, hiring has stayed pretty flat for tech. You are now starting to see a little bit of an increase in some of financial services in some of those areas. Healthcare still continues to grow a little bit, but the areas that have declined the most, I would say, are probably federal government and tech, big tech.
And when you look at that trend, do you expect it to continue for the next 2 to 3 years?
With the federal government, it's quite frankly very hard to predict what's going to be happening there. Week to week, we're all learning something new. I think with tech, it's going to be interesting to watch. I don't know that it's going to continue declining. I actually think some new positions are going to start popping up as a result of actually a lot of the AI work that we've been talking about. So I don't think that tech is going to continue to decline for the next 2 to 3 years would be my prediction.
Where do you think early career workers are least at risk of layoffs at the moment?
Oh, that is a hard question. I think, it really comes down to, I would actually say, the individual's ability to ramp quickly and show value quickly. I'm not sure if there really are any broad industries or role types that I would say kind of keeps you safe from being laid off. It's an employer's market at the moment. It is competitive. And so I think it is really imperative for all workers, especially early talent workers, to ramp up quickly, to learn their industry to learn the culture of their company and to very quickly ascertain how will I add value within the first 60, 90 days of being on the job, and how do I continue to look for opportunities and pockets to really showcase my expertise, or to showcase my curiosity, or showcase how I can contribute in a meaningful way. So I don't know that there's any specific spot that will completely keep you safe from that reality. I think it's a matter of figuring out how you can individually safeguard yourself.
And I think that the time frame you're suggesting, these first early 100 days or so, it's crucial, but it's also not a lot of time, especially if you're working for a company in a hybrid fashion and you're not able to make those relationships quickly, form those relationships quickly with managers. This seems to be a pretty anxious time, even if you do have a job.
Yeah, well, let me actually back up and say the majority of this generation, and certainly the class that has just graduated, they would prefer to actually work in person for some of the reasons that you just talked about. So they actually want to be in person. They want to be able to meet their senior managers. They want to be able to actually meet and be with their team. They want that interaction because it is easier and it is faster for them to be able to pick up on those norms and to be able to then contribute in a meaningful way. So I'd start by saying more of them are gravitating towards jobs that actually are in person or provide some hybrid flexibility to the job. And then I think the second is we've really been encouraging students to ask more explicit questions of their supervisors and of their managers as soon as they start, as early as onboarding and orientation. Ask them about meeting norms. Ask them about what it looks like in terms of expected communication. How do you use Slack and email? What are the expected timeframes in which you should be responding to something? There are a lot of implicit things that should be made explicit, and we also give that advice to employers all the time.
Right. And this is, a little bit into one of the topics we'll get into a little bit later, which is the cultural divide inside of the workforce. So I do want to get to some of that tactical stuff later on, but just to stay at the macro level for another beat here, one of the things that I found most fascinating about the latest report that you put out at Handshake, the class of 2025, is this real sense of, again, anxiety, and especially in computer science fields, and these students specifically. Looking at your data, it's already showing that the tech sector has clearly experienced several years of application declines as layoffs have rolled through, and that your data says the people who are majoring in computer science are actually more pessimistic than their peers last year. Is this because they've sensed the impact that AI is having, and so they're regretful? I don't know. Is that the case, that some are regretful that they chose this field?
I wouldn't say they're regretful. That's certainly not what we're hearing from students. However, what they are very aware of is exactly what you said, the impact of AI on their career. So I think computer science students in particular are very aware that AI is supplementing a lot of the coding work that they have been learning over the past 4 years. And they're realizing as they graduate that because they are literally in the middle of this evolution as we speak, they are going to have to evolve even faster than some of their peers previously. And so there's a big question mark around what does that look like? And can I also teach myself some of the AI tools that engineers, software programmers are using on a regular basis to supplement their coding? The reality, though, is they still have to know the basics in order to actually review the code that might be produced from AI. So this is another great example of where we can't just rely purely on AI to do everything. You still have to have the expertise, even at an entry level, to be able to review and know if something is strong or good or your intended outcome. And so I think it's a matter of trying to figure out, how do I pivot very, very quickly when I'm graduating in a week, or I just graduated and I need a job right now? How do I showcase that? And I think it's just the confluence of timing around all of those pieces. I was just at a major tech conference a couple of weeks ago, and this question was also asked, and several individuals from major tech companies were still saying coding, tech, computer science, still very needed, still a skill set that, quite frankly, even more people should probably have at this point. to supplement with what is happening in AI, not less.
It's just such a costly investment, as you know, higher education.
Yes.
And it's not just a matter of the money, it's the matter of time. And you could have used those 4 years to study other things. Other experts I've interviewed on this program and also talking in the media elsewhere, they have a tongue-in-cheek answer to this usually when I ask what part of the economy is safest, and it's manual labor. And so I was surprised that that's not the response that you gave earlier when you had said that like you should really just focus on the early 100 days. And I guess that's probably because your platform skews a little bit more toward white collar jobs. I just want to give context to your answer there.
We do. And of course we work with 2-year and 4-year institutions, so that is certainly the space that we reside in more. I would be the first to say we definitely need folks in those blue collar positions. I also know that that's not necessarily the interest of a lot of our students. And so I want to speak to the fact that if our students are interested in these white collar positions, those white collar positions will still exist, but it might look a little bit competitive, and the economy is cyclical. So we're going to have to watch and see, and they'll have to be ready to pivot if they want to continue to be marketable and strongly competitive.
And you just returned from another conference just last night before you settled back into San Francisco. And it was a conference around education and higher ed specifically. How quickly are schools actually adopting AI into the curriculum? I think for the class of 2025, maybe they caught a little bit of that as OpenAI's ChatGPT launched at the end of 2022. Do you see the curriculum actually being updated in real time?
I do see schools actually changing the curriculum in real time to include more AI. However, I would also be the first to say it is not happening necessarily at a speed that will keep up with all of the AI developments that we are reading about as well. AI is changing so rapidly, and we both know higher education is not built structurally to evolve in that same way. So there are some schools that have certainly moved much faster than others. You have your ASUs of the world who are moving very, very quickly, and for more than 2 years now have already had some AI programs embedded. You have other schools that are standing up AI centers or hiring in faculty that have AI expertise along with their discipline or domain area. So you really are starting to see a breadth of approaches and strategies across different types of institutions, whether they're large public flagship or they're smaller liberal arts private institutions. That being said, there's still a lot more work that needs to be done at the higher ed level in order to really help train students on how they might use AI. Right now, according to our survey, the majority of students are learning AI on their own. And they're actually eager for their employers to give them a little bit more training around how to do it in a job-specific way. So I think that's also an opportunity for some employers to stand out.
I know something that you're very focused on is also equitable access to jobs and into education. I'm curious how you're seeing AI potentially impact negatively the problem that already exists today, which is that not every student has equitable access to opportunities.
Yeah, we use the Carnegie classification of more inclusive school versus more selective school. So if you look at the Carnegie classification, the more selective schools for the past year or two have exposed their students to more AI tools than the more inclusive schools. And so we will continue to see a gap unless the more inclusive schools also pick up the pace in actually offering tooling, offering faculty that can speak to it, making sure that they're maybe bringing folks in from industry. There are ways to mitigate this. And I think we're still early, and it is still possible to close any gaps that might exist, because at the moment, it's so new. So many people are still learning how to use it. And so there are a lot of opportunities. And in some of these conversations that I have certainly had with institutions, it's about, okay, if you don't have the inside expertise or you don't have the resourcing to necessarily build a center or build a whole new degree program, how can you bring folks from industry and employers that might be in your backyard or not far from you in to actually help supplement the work, the conversation, the exposure? A lot of this is pure exposure. Once students are exposed to it, a lot of them are learning on their own. And so it's just a matter of exposure. Now, the good news is that in our most recent report, 98% of students now report that they are aware of AI tools. 98%. That's huge. And that's up significantly from just a couple of years ago. Now, obviously not surprising given that a couple of years ago it was brand new, and now more people are using it. It's much more a part of our daily vernacular. But I think that is a good sign that even students who maybe do not have the most resources, or maybe in an underrepresented population, or go to a more inclusive school, they too are already starting to figure out some of this on their own.
Because we've talked about the culture, the digital divide for so long in this world and in this country specifically. AI is one of these compounding factors that could make that chasm much deeper and much wider. So I like this perspective that it's still early enough. But I do worry some of these tools that are now getting paywall, Perplexity, even ChatGPT, that some of that could also continue to compound the divide. I want to end this conversation of computer science majors and kind of what they're dealing with specifically with some more practical advice. I mean, if you are somebody in this job market and you're looking for a job and it's been months, I mean, at what point should they give up? I know it sounds like a bit harsh and sort of blunt, but I think a lot of people are, asking this question of themselves. And especially if this is the first time you're entering the job market, it can be really demoralizing to have the rejection letters come in or to be ghosted. So what advice do you have for college students who have been in this search for such a long time, for maybe, let's say, 6 months and longer?
Yeah, look, my first piece of advice is you have to keep your attitude positive. I know that sounds really trite and it sounds much easier said than done, but your attitude and literally the aura that you are giving off to people matters in your job search. Nobody wants to hire someone who's desperate. They just don't. And so you have to keep your positive attitude present. So if that means you need to surround yourself with a community of friends and family who can keep you going, pick you up every time you get that rejection letter, remind you of the strengths that you have, you need to do that. You have to find some way to keep yourself going on this. I actually would tell you to not give up. You can't give up. You need a job. So you have to keep going. And the only way you're going to get one is if you don't come across as bitter, cynical, and sarcastic about the entire job search process. Nobody wants to hire that person. So I'll give it to you straight. That's definitely one piece of it. The second piece of it is make sure that you are actually supplementing your discipline, expertise, knowledge with AI. So take this time while you are doing your job search to actually learn what are the tools that are most commonly used for your job role or your industry, and start teaching it to yourself. And if you can't figure that out on your own, start finding people that you could reach out to and ask them for advice about how they're using it, and start learning. And then I think the third thing really is you have to continue to be intentional about the applications that you are sending out. Too many students are sending hundreds and hundreds of applications. The problem with that is that you're literally boosting application numbers, making it more competitive for everyone. And you're not actually interested in half of these jobs, nor have you been intentional about your application materials, which means you're also wasting the employer's time as they're trying to sift through all of these applications. So be intentional. Look for the ones that are actually a good fit for what you're interested in, where you want to live, where you want to work, what you want to do. And take the time to actually go meet people. You still have to build relationships. Networking is not just about connecting with somebody online. So if you're having a hard time with your job search, I would seriously question whether or not you're doing enough of the three things that I've just mentioned.
I think it's going to be hard for some people to hear, especially if they are, quite desperate to try to pull up themselves and to put on that brave face. But, let's not just be the doom and gloom here. I would love to hear from you some of the more unexpected opportunities that AI has already sort of created for entry-level workers and the people who are coming out of college or coming into this market.
Yeah, well, I think one, honestly, is that because everybody is learning about AI right now and everyone's still trying to figure it out, nobody has all the answers to it, it's actually provided the new class and the new graduates with an opportunity to be more in the conversation when they get into the workplace. Lots of employers that I've spoken with that have said some of our earliest graduates have been really pivotal in helping us to design within our organization. How should we use AI? What are the ethical standards or guidelines that we should be thinking about within our own place of work? They're actually turning to the newer generation to help guide some of those conversations because we're all learning it at the same time. And the new generation is pretty excited and honestly willing to jump right in and start to figure it out with everybody. So in some ways, it's actually put some of the new entry-level folks on an even more level playing field right off the bat as soon as they've gotten into their organization. So I think that's definitely a very positive piece that I've heard from some employers. And I'm hearing it from employers, I will note, not even from the job seeker or the new candidate. I'm hearing it from the employer. So the employers are actually seeing this as a benefit to their organization. So I think that's something I would remind candidates that they have in their back pocket that they should continue to talk about. The second thing is honestly productivity and efficiency. There are some very mundane tasks that you and I might remember from some of our entry-level jobs that we held that were not the most fun to have to do over and over and over again. And AI has allowed a lot of entry-level workers to automate some of those very repetitive tasks so that they actually free up more time to do higher level thinking. And that has allowed them to sometimes do work that they typically wouldn't have seen until their second year or their third year, or in some cases, even their fourth year. And that's been pretty exciting as well. Now, does that mean that the standard for entry level has risen or the output or productivity has also risen? Yes, probably. And I think over time that will probably be the case. But right now, that has really allowed a lot of entry level workers to also do sometimes more thoughtful and meaningful work that they're more excited about, that they didn't think they would be able to do so early in their careers either.
And what is one thing about this conversation that you think is misunderstood or overhyped, this AI job tension topic?
I think the thing that's most overhyped is that AI is going to take everyone's jobs. I don't think that's the case. I think people who know AI might take your job. I don't know that AI itself is going to take your job. So I think that piece is probably overhyped in my opinion. I still think about a lot of the places where AI is most used, right? Customer service, phone lines, things like that. Now, but I want to ask every single listener right now, when you call your cable company, or you call your phone company, or you're trying to return something, or you need to reach your credit card company, and you get stuck in that automated loop, are you not deeply frustrated? Are you not more willing to use a company where when you call, you actually get a live person? I have definitely noticed my behavior as a consumer. When I find a company where I call the number and I actually get someone and a live person either responds to me on email quickly or answers the phone and can answer my very detailed or complex question, I'm like, you just got my business. I'm buying more from you. I'm coming back again. Versus other places where I'm starting to take my money elsewhere. And the reality is, in aggregate, we will continue to see that. So I think everybody's hype about how AI is going to take all of these frontline workers, I just don't believe it, because I think as consumers, we also don't necessarily want that. We don't want to only interact with machines. We still want to interact with humans as well. And I think that's actually something that we all learned coming out of the pandemic, was how important community and human interaction still is. And I think in the growth of AI, as much as I support AI, I also think the human connection is not going to be lost. It will become even more important.
I want to move the conversation into the future and talk more about the data that you put together, that the Handshake team put together, and just looking into the next 2 to 3 years and where trends are going. For students, which majors are really finding the most success in the workforce?
Well, certainly a lot of the healthcare fields are in very high demand. And so folks that are going into a lot of the health related majors, in fact, do have a lot of opportunity in front of them. We still have a shortage of nurses. We still have a shortage of a lot of health positions right now in a lot of our hospitals and a lot of our clinics. And so we are finding that a lot of students that are majoring or choosing to go into those areas are in fact finding a pretty direct pipeline into those opportunities. We also know from our data and through just general demand, we still have a shortage of teachers. And so that is also another area within our education system that could use a lot more applicants, could use a lot more people. Now, that one is harder from a major perspective because you don't have to just major in education to become a teacher. You actually can major in pretty much anything and still become a teacher. And so that one is a little bit trickier in terms of mapping from major to career. It's not exact in that way. But what I would highly encourage anybody listening is if you are thinking about a career, while I fully understand it is not a high paying career, it is a rewarding one. It is a tough one. It is a challenging one. It's an intellectual one. And it is one that will truly shape our future because you are working with a future generation. And I do hope that over time, more people will go into some of those areas. So healthcare and education are two of the largest continuing to grow areas, of course. I do think overall, though, there is still an interest, actually, in the humanities. And I know that that's sometimes surprising for folks to hear, but in the day of AI and so much technology, your ability to synthesize information, to understand things from multiple disciplines, to be able to be a strong critical thinker and a very good writer, and a good, strong communicator verbally is actually still very sought after by employers. And we are hearing that every single day from large employers, multinational ones, to small mom and pop shops and middle regional employers. Like they're all looking for some of that skill set because they're looking for something that can supplement the use of all the technology that is also happening. So we are still seeing some interest in those areas, and those students are still getting employed as well, even though I think media doesn't often highlight that. The main message I would actually say to this question is your major doesn't dictate your career. There's a lot of flexibility in what you major in and what you end up pursuing. And so I think a lot of the reports that you've probably seen come out of other centers that often say these majors aren't making good pay or they're not making or having good careers in the future. I think it's misleading in that it's not the major that bears your salary. It is the industry you choose to go into that determines what salary you're going to get. So I have lots of English students that I have advised over the years. Those that go into teaching make a very different pay than those who chose to go work in financial services and work for the big banks. They're both getting hired. They're getting hired in two very different sectors, and they make very different amounts of money. It's not because of English. English isn't what dictated their salaries. It's the industries they chose to go into.
In this economy, it does seem like your dreams, if you're a younger worker, are dictated by the economy more than what you dreamed of being when you grow up. When you were growing up, is that true? Should people readjust their dream jobs now to match what the economy is actually going to be able to offer them realistically?
I think that's such a personal question, honestly. I think some people, they want to be able to live the life that they want to be able to live, and they're sort of working to live versus living to work. And I think in those cases, being pragmatic is probably the answer. And I think it's as simple as that. I think there are other people who want to wake up every single day and feel like the work that they are doing is incredibly meaningful and intentional. And honestly, for those folks, I would tell you just being pragmatic is probably going to make you a little bit sad. And you're not going to feel very engaged in your work every day. So let's get creative about how you might be able to still get your foot in the door into something that really interests you, but perhaps maybe isn't going to be as stable, or maybe will require you to pivot, or right, like there are trade-offs to every decision that you make. And I think it really does kind of come down to a person's individual values on what is most important to them. I also think this changes quite rapidly throughout your lifetime. So I think what you care about in your early 20s when you're first launching is different than maybe in your mid 30s when you have a family, or is different in your mid 40s when you're closer to retirement and you're starting to think about your next phase. And I think it's okay for those values to shift and change because your life at that point is a little bit different. You might be prioritizing different things.
I think that's one of the most surprising things about aging and growing into adulthood is that you find yourself wanting different things, and that can be a real wake-up call, and especially if you have tied your identity very closely to the things that you thought you wanted. But I think it's important to realize when that actually shifts inside of you and to not be afraid of it. Another fascinating finding from your study is that more than a third of full-time applications submitted by the class of 2025 were for companies with organizational sizes of 250 people or fewer, and that's up from 25% 2 years ago. So what are the factors driving this particular trend, and how long do you expect it to last?
Oh, I love this topic. So small employers are on the rise, and they are getting more and more popular with this generation for a couple of reasons. So one is there are lots of great opportunities with smaller employers that often allow early talent to wear multiple hats. So they can be a little bit more of a generalist, and they can do broader scoped projects or assignments, or just have a larger area that they're responsible for. And that gives them greater opportunity to potentially advance within the organization and to be able to build skills. That's really important to this generation. So that's one component of it. The second is that they actually have more access to senior leaders because it's a smaller organization. At 200, 150, you actually know everybody in your organization. And so the ability to have that access and to be able to learn in that way feels much more accessible to this generation. And they also really like that because it feels like they're getting real talk. It feels like they're getting authenticity. These are all things that we've heard a lot for Gen Z. The third is that smaller businesses are also typically located in smaller size cities. And that is a really big piece as Gen Z deeply values work-life balance and being able to not have to wait 3 decades or 4 decades before they retire to live the type of life that they actually want. And so maybe choosing a mid-sized city with a smaller employer that gives them decent pay, allows them the right sort of flexibility or work-life balance. They can actually save up for a house. They can save up for retirement. They're able to settle down. They can go out with their friends. These are all things that matter to Gen Z, and small businesses allows for some of that. So we are really seeing this confluence of a lot of their values and things that they've been talking about kind of combine around their desire to maybe look at more small businesses than previous generations might have.
And this isn't just, startups and VCs. I mean, these are real regional. To your point, proximity, according to the study that you guys conducted in February, to family is actually one of the top priorities for job searches for Gen Z, that they want to be near their family, they want to be near their hometown, which is so different than I think for older millennials and maybe Gen Xers when you wanted to get the heck out of town and go to the big city and tell everyone you made it and look at this big job you have. It's staying closer to home, but also maybe those values have shifted a lot as well. And maybe that's a boost for smaller business recruiting, for the early talent pipeline, because they're going to be the ones that are developing it. Just lastly, looking at the bigger macro picture. Yeah. And I know that, you don't look at this every single day, but I do wonder where you think people should be looking to in the economic data that comes out of when some of the maybe, slow hiring of early career workers will actually have a larger impact in the economy to come. I mean, you're already seeing the unemployment rate among college graduates, higher than the overall economy, 6%. Versus 4%. And just in May, the labor force participation rate was actually driven down by workers 24 or younger. And so that drop seems concerning. Why should decision makers care about this trend? Again, if they're racing to kind of make their AI payments sort of pay off, I do wonder who else should care that this trend is happening, that these younger workers are having such a tough time finding jobs.
I mean, look, if I'm being optimistic and idealistic, I would love to appeal to people's sort of moral and ethical desire of wanting to help the younger generation because they are our future, right? Gen Z officially, as of last year, has surpassed the number of baby boomers that are in the workforce. And with 15 million expected retirements over the next, I think it's 5 to 8 years, we need more talent in that pipeline. And the best way to do that is to start investing in the early talent that is here so that they are ready to take on some of those more senior roles when all of those retirements happen. Okay, that would be my idealistic sort of reasoning for you. If I'm being a little cynical, I would simply say to someone, it is cheaper to hire early talent. It is. It's cheaper to hire early talent than it is to hire more senior talent. And so if you are trying to get something done and you want to invest in your future, it is literally a better return for you to hire the early talent now and build them up, train them, so that you actually have folks that will be here once all of your retirements sort of happen.
I like that. Thank you for both vantage points. And so are there any warning signs that we should watch for if Gen Z fails to integrate successfully into the labor force?
I genuinely don't think they will. I actually think they will integrate just fine. And I think partially for a couple of reasons. One, every generation previous to the one that's coming into the workforce likes to gripe about the new workforce. Mm-hmm. But the reality is the oldest Gen Z is already 28 years old right now. So they're already hitting the point where they're probably getting into managerial roles. They're probably a new supervisor or maybe have already been supervising for a few years. They're starting to move into more mid-level and senior ranks, depending on the size of the company. And you've got another 6 graduating classes coming after that will also be Gen Z. So before we know it, Gen Z will be the predominant workforce sort of population that we're working with, especially as boomers retire and even Gen Xers start to think about retirement. Each generation that comes in, they naturally start to shape the policies, the benefits, the culture, the norms of an organization. And so I don't think they're going to have a problem sort of assimilating in, because I think they themselves will actually be the ones to shift some of this culture. And I don't think all of it is bad. I mean, wouldn't we all like a little bit more work-life balance? Maybe this generation is just more unapologetic about saying it.
And I think they've entered the workforce at the time when, you know, the reality is undeniable. And yes, you're right. I mean, we've all tried to adopt Gen Z culture already by pulling up our socks at the gym and other things like that. As we round out our conversation, I'm curious about your take on parents and what they should do if they have high schoolers today or even younger. What should they be prioritizing in their education, in their kids' education?
Oh my gosh, Hope, I love this question because I have a 12-year-old. So I think about this quite a lot. I think as parents, there are a couple of things that they really should prioritize right now. There are some major life skills that your kids need to know and understand that are like pure basics that you can be working with your kids on. Teach them responsibility, teach them how to take initiative, teach them how to show up on time, teach them how to time manage, make sure they actually know how to navigate the physical world around them, right? These are very basic things that you can be teaching someone as early as like late elementary school, middle school, to get them prepared for the workforce. My son this summer took the initiative to get himself a little volunteer job because he's too young to get a part-time job, but he wasn't doing camps this year, right? It's like little things like that that can actually make a really big difference in setting you up for the future and just knowing how to engage and navigate with people in the world. I think that's really important. The second thing that I think is critical is social and emotional development for children. How you interact with someone, being able to read somebody else's body language, being able to read a room. These are really critical skills that are going to separate the good from great employees when you're in the workforce. And the earlier you learn how to do that, the better off you're going to be. And the third is communication. How you actually communicate, how you convey your ideas, all of that matters. And so I think being able to do all of that early on, in my opinion, is way more important than what sports they're playing, whether or not they get good grades. Like, I think it's those pieces that actually matter and will contribute to kind, generous, contributing citizens one day in our future.
I like that. And just, I mean, we're both in centers of power, you know, on the East and West Coast respectively. So I think those are much broader than just what colleges people should go to. But if college degrees do become less important, I know we didn't have time today to get to it, do salaries come down?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I don't know if they do. I also think the reality is college, in my opinion, isn't going to necessarily decrease in value as long as folks that are in power want to continue sending their children to college. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. So that is perhaps my cynical view of that.
I mean, it's the reality.
I think it's a reality. I am a huge believer that education is in fact a social mobility vehicle and engine. And I am a huge believer that education is the one thing that someone can never take away from you. They can't take your knowledge away from you. So I think it's really powerful. I think the value will continue to get through this tough time. I think some things might change, but I think overall college itself is not necessarily going away.
Okay, and that goes back to your point about why some of the younger students are looking at smaller companies to get more of that. And then just tactically speaking, and this is advice now, and practically speaking, what are some of the biggest myths that both sides, younger workers and seasoned managers, what do they need to let go of to build real trust inside of these organizations with different generations?
Well, I think with the younger generation, I think sometimes they have a myth or a belief of the older generation that they're stale, they're not open to change, they're slow or unable to use technology, right? I think there's like those myths that sort of exist. And I think the reality is when you teach somebody or you show somebody or you believe that they actually can do it, often they'll rise to the occasion, and they will. They might not know it. They might not have used it their entire life, but can they pick it up? Yes, I believe that older generations have the capacity to pick it up. And it's just a matter of training and enabling, right? In some ways, it's the same thing in terms of vice versa, the older generation to the younger generation. I think there are myths that they're lazy, that they don't want to work, that they're entitled, that they want it easy, right? And I think the reality is they just have values that are really important to them that they're unapologetically saying that are important to them. They're not hiding it. They're not like having the value, but not sharing what that is. But I think in terms of the way they show up in the workplace, sometimes older generations assume that younger generation, they don't know how to talk to people. They don't know how to interact in a meeting. They don't know how to give feedback. Some of that might be true, but it's because nobody's taught them. So same thing, enable them, support them, teach them. So I kind of think for both generations, it's a matter of actually having that open dialogue and conversation around, I want to be good at this.
Yeah.
I might need a little bit of help. You have to have enough humility to ask for some of that. And I think you also have to have enough wherewithal within yourself to be open to supporting someone in that learning journey.
If there's one quality that older workers need to adopt from Gen Z, what would that be? And also vice versa?
Oh, I think for the older generation, I would say it is probably their quality of recognizing the beauty of work-life balance, the beauty of being able to actually enjoy life while you are young enough to to enjoy it, and to not just put it off completely to keep saying, I'll do that when I retire. Right? I think this generation is actually really good about being like, no, I want to like enjoy some of that now. I don't have to enjoy everything, but I want to enjoy some of it now. And I actually think that's a really healthy way of looking at life and looking at work. And quite frankly, it's not necessarily new. Like, look at our European counterparts. A lot of them have had this culture forever. And so it's not like it doesn't exist. It does exist. It just hasn't existed here. And so I think that's something that the older generation can take away from the younger generation. I think vice versa, I would say, I think the younger generation could learn something about delayed gratification. So kind of in the same vein, it's just the other side of that coin is like sometimes there's value and there's reward to just waiting a little bit on something, or to like have to keep working at something until it happens. And I'm not saying like you have to delay everything until later, but I think balance is probably the key for both.
Yeah, the marshmallow test. All right, last question. If you're a Gen Z worker, how do you actually ask for what you want in a way that actually lands with your manager?
I think the key to this is always context and framing. So if you're asking for something you want, you have to first understand the context of where you work and what matters to your supervisor. What do they care about? What are they going after? What are the goals? And how is the thing that you are asking for, how does that fit into all of this? Because if it's all about you, there is no incentive for them to necessarily want to give it to you. If you can make this a win-win for both of you, you're much more likely to get the answer that you want. So you've got to figure out the context and the framing based on the needs, the priorities, and sort of the importance to your supervisor.
what is one big trend that managers need to be on the lookout for over the next 2 to 3 years?
I think the biggest trend, honestly, is just making the implicit explicit. I think you'll set yourself up for a lot more success if you go into your conversations with your new supervisees and actually ask them questions about what they want, need, or expect from a supervisor, how they like to receive feedback, how you like to give feedback, what the communication norms are for your organization. These are really basic, simple questions that you can ask right off the bat that will literally speed up ramp time by more than several months, because otherwise they're just trying to observe and figure it out when you could have just told them.
Amazing. I know we talked about a lot, but was there anything else on your mind that we didn't get to today?
No, I think we covered it all. This was terrific.
Thank you so much for being on, and I'm sure we'll have you back on again really soon.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.